I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd have to fight my own family in court. But here I am, sitting in this lawyer's office in downtown Phoenix, staring at documents that prove my stepmother literally erased me from existence while I was unconscious on an operating table. My name is Sienna, and I'm 41 years old. 3 years ago, I thought I knew who I was. I was David Chen's daughter, the only child of a man who built a construction empire from nothing, who came to Arizona in the 70s with $200 and a toolbox. I was the girl who spent summers on job sites, learning to read blueprints before I could properly read chapter books. I was his legacy. Turns out I was wrong about all of that. The surgery was supposed to be routine, a hysterectomy. I'd been putting it off for months because of the fibroids, but the pain finally got so bad I couldn't ignore it anymore. Dad was 78 then, and his health had been declining since his second heart attack the year before. But he insisted on being at the hospital with me. "I'll be right here when you wake up, sweetheart," he said, squeezing my hand as they wheeled me toward the operating room. Those were the last words my father ever spoke to me. I should have seen the signs earlier, should have paid attention to how Marlene looked at me during those final months. She'd married my dad when I was 35, just 6 years ago. I was old enough to know better than to trust her. But Dad seemed happy. After Mom died when I was 22, he'd been alone for over a decade. Marlene was 52, blonde, and she laughed at all his stories, even the ones I'd heard 1,000 times. "She makes me feel young again," Dad would say, and I wanted that for him. I really did. So I smiled and welcomed her into our family. I helped plan their wedding. I called her my stepmother and meant it with kindness, but Marlene never called me her stepdaughter, not once. When people asked about family, she'd say, "David has a daughter from his first marriage." Like I was some distant relative instead of the person who'd held his hand through chemotherapy when Mom was dying. Like I hadn't spent every Sunday for the past 6 years, having dinner at their house, bringing groceries when Dad got too tired to shop. The surgery took longer than expected. What should have been 2 hours turned into 5. There were complications, internal bleeding. I lost a lot of blood and needed transfusions. When I finally woke up, it was almost midnight, and I was alone. A nurse named Patricia came to check on me. She was kind, with gentle hands and a soft voice. "How are you feeling, honey?" "Where's my dad?" I asked. My throat felt like sandpaper. She looked confused. "I'm sorry, who?" "David Chen. He was supposed to be here when I woke up. He promised." Patricia checked her chart. "I don't see any emergency contacts listed here except for a Marlene Chen. She left around 6, said she'd be back tomorrow." That should have been my first clue that something was wrong. Dad would never leave me alone in a hospital. Never. When I had my appendix out at 16, he slept in that uncomfortable chair for 3 nights straight. When I broke my wrist in college, he drove 4 hours to Tucson just to make sure I was okay. I called his cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. I called the house. No answer. "Maybe he went home to rest," Patricia suggested. "Surgery days are hard on family too." I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. So I spent that first night alone, telling myself Dad was just tired, that Marlene had convinced him to go home and sleep in his own bed, that he'd be there first thing in the morning with coffee and those terrible hospital gift shop flowers he always brought. But morning came, and Dad didn't. Marlene showed up around 10, looking perfectly put together in a way that seemed wrong for someone whose husband's daughter had just had major surgery. Her makeup was flawless, her hair was styled. She was wearing a new dress I'd never seen before. "How are you feeling?" she asked. But she didn't sit down. She stood by the window, checking her phone. "Where's Dad?" "He's resting. The stress of yesterday really took it out of him." "Can you call him? I want to talk to him." "He's sleeping, Sienna. You know how he gets when his routine is disrupted." Something in her tone made my stomach clench. There was a coldness there I'd never heard before, a distance. "Is he okay? His heart?" "He's fine, just tired." She finally looked at me, and her eyes were different, harder. "The doctor says you'll be discharged tomorrow if everything looks good." "Will Dad pick me up?" "I'll handle it." That was it. She left 20 minutes later, claiming she had errands to run. I spent another night alone, and this time I couldn't pretend it was normal. Dad had never missed a day of my life when I needed him, not once. When Marlene came to pick me up the next day, I was ready with questions, but she had the radio turned up loud and kept talking about traffic, about how busy the hospital parking was, about anything except why my father hadn't come to see me. I want to go see Dad, I said, as we pulled into my apartment complex. He's sleeping. Then I'll wait until he wakes up. Sienna. She turned off the engine and looked at me. David needs rest. The doctor says stress isn't good for his heart. Maybe give it a few days. A few days, like seeing his own daughter was some kind of burden. I should have driven over there anyway, should have used my key and walked right in. But I was still weak from surgery, still on pain medication that made everything feel fuzzy around the edges. And some part of me was scared of what I might find. Scared that Dad really was too sick to see me. Scared that I was being selfish for wanting him there when I needed him, so I waited. I called every day, and every day Marlene had an excuse. He was napping, he was having a bad day. The doctor said no visitors. He'd call me back when he felt better. A week passed, then 2 weeks. I started driving by the house, just to see if his truck was in the driveway. It was always there, but the curtains were always closed. I never saw him working in his garden or sitting on the porch like he used to. I called his doctor's office, but they couldn't give me any information. Patient privacy, they said. I wasn't listed as an emergency contact anymore. That's when I knew something was really wrong. I'd been Dad's emergency contact for everything since Mom died. I had power of attorney for his medical decisions. I was on all his accounts at the bank. We'd set it up that way after his first heart attack, when he realized he needed someone he trusted to handle things if something happened. But now I wasn't on anything. I hired a lawyer, not because I wanted to fight my family, but because I was terrified something had happened to Dad, and Marlene wasn't telling me. The lawyer, a woman named Janet Rodriguez, was patient with my tears and my confusion. Let me make some calls, she said. See what I can find out. What she found out changed everything. 3 days after my surgery, while I was still in the hospital, Dad had been taken to his lawyer's office. Marlene claimed he'd had a good day and wanted to update his will. The lawyer, some guy named Peterson, who'd never handled Dad's affairs before, had drawn up entirely new documents. Everything Dad owned, the construction company, the house, his savings, his life insurance, all of it went to Marlene. I wasn't mentioned anywhere, not even as a beneficiary for a single dollar, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that they'd changed my name in all the legal documents. Instead of Sienna Chen, his daughter, I was listed as Sienna Martinez in the old will that was being revoked. Martinez was my mother's maiden name, the name I'd never used. By changing my name in the legal paperwork, they made it look like I was some unrelated person who had no claim to anything. They literally erased me. This doesn't make sense, I told Janet. Dad would never do this, and why would they change my name? It's a way to make the disinheritance look intentional, she explained. If anyone challenges the will, they can claim your father meant to leave everything to his wife, not to some person named Sienna Martinez who isn't his legal daughter. But I am his legal daughter. He adopted me when he married my mom. My birth certificate says Chen. I know, but if someone doesn't look too closely at the records, if they just see the name discrepancy, it muddies the water, makes it harder to prove you have a legitimate claim. I felt sick, not surgery sick, but soul sick. The kind of sick that comes from realizing the people you trusted most in the world have been planning to destroy you. Can we fight it? We can try, but we need to prove your father wasn't competent when he signed these documents, or that he was under duress. Do you have any evidence that his mental state was compromised? I thought about Dad's last few months. He'd been tired, yes, forgetful sometimes, but he still knew who I was, still called me every Sunday morning to check in, still asked about my job, my friends, my life, or had he? Looking back, I realized most of our conversations in those final months had been short. Marlene was always in the background, saying they had somewhere to be or that Dad needed to rest. Had she been controlling his calls, limiting our time together? I need to see him, I told Janet. I need to talk to him myself. That might not be possible. Why not? She looked down at her notes. Sienna, your father died 2 weeks ago. The words didn't make sense at first. They bounced around in my head like marbles in an empty jar, making noise but not connecting to anything real. That's not possible. I'm sorry, the death certificate is dated. No. I stood up so fast the chair fell backward. No, that's not possible. Marlene would have told me, she would have called me. But even as I said it, I knew it was true. I knew it in the way you know things that are too terrible to accept but too real to deny. Dad was gone. Had been gone for 2 weeks, and I'd spent those 2 weeks calling a house where no one would ever answer again, driving by a driveway where his truck would never move again. I'd missed his funeral. I'd missed saying goodbye. I'd missed everything. The obituary listed Marlene as his only survivor, Janet said gently. There was no mention of a daughter. I don't remember leaving the lawyer's office. I don't remember driving home. The next thing I knew, I was sitting on my kitchen floor, holding the phone, staring at Marlene's number on the screen. I called her. Hello? Her voice was bright, cheerful, like nothing had happened. You didn't tell me he died. Silence. Marlene, you didn't tell me my father died. Sienna. Her voice changed, became careful. I'm sorry you found out this way. David's passing was very sudden, very peaceful. When? 2 weeks ago, in his sleep. And you didn't think to call me? You were recovering from surgery. David wouldn't have wanted you to be stressed. I almost laughed. Almost. He was my father. He was my husband. For 6 years. I was his daughter for 37 years. Sienna, I know you're upset, but David made his wishes very clear. He wanted a small private service, just close family. I am close family. You're his stepdaughter from his first marriage. The words hit me like a physical blow. He adopted me, legally adopted me when I was 8 years old. I'm not his stepdaughter, I'm his daughter. That's not how David saw it in the end. That's not true. He changed his will, Sienna. He left everything to me. If you were really his daughter, don't you think he would have provided for you? I wanted to scream. Wanted to reach through the phone and shake her until she admitted what she'd done. But I also wanted to understand. Needed to understand. Why? I whispered. Why would you do this? I didn't do anything. David made his own choices. He was sick, confused. He was perfectly clear about what he wanted, and what he wanted was to take care of his wife. What about the name change, in the legal documents? Another pause, longer this time. I don't know what you're talking about. They changed my name from Chen to Martinez in the old will, made it look like I wasn't his legal daughter. Sienna, you're grieving, you're not thinking clearly. Maybe you should talk to someone, a therapist. She hung up. I sat on that kitchen floor for hours, trying to piece together what had happened, trying to figure out when my father had stopped being my father, when I'd stopped being his daughter, when Marlene had decided I was a threat that needed to be eliminated. The truth came to me slowly, like a photograph developing in a dark room. Dad's health had been declining for over a year. He'd had 2 heart attacks, and the doctors had been clear that another one would probably be fatal. Marlene knew she was going to be a widow soon. And she knew that when Dad died, I would inherit at least half of everything, maybe more. The construction company alone was worth over $2 million. The house was paid off and worth another $400,000. Dad had life insurance, savings, investments. Marlene was looking at splitting a fortune with a stepdaughter she'd never wanted in the first place. So she started planning. She began limiting my access to Dad gradually. Shorter phone calls, fewer visits. Always with excuses that sounded reasonable. He was tired. He was having a bad day. The doctor said he needed rest. She found a new lawyer, one who didn't know our family history, one who wouldn't question why David Chen was suddenly disinheriting the daughter he'd talked about constantly for 6 years. And then she waited for the perfect opportunity. My surgery was that opportunity. While I was unconscious, while I was vulnerable and unable to protect myself or my father, she moved. She took Dad to that lawyer's office and had him sign documents that erased me from his life. Documents that used the wrong name to make sure I couldn't fight back. Did Dad know what he was signing? Was he confused, medicated, scared? Or did Marlene convince him somehow that I didn't care about him anymore, that I was only interested in his money? I'll never know. And that might be the cruelest part of all. The legal battle took 18 months. 18 months of depositions and document reviews and expert witnesses. 18 months of having my relationship with my father dissected by strangers. 18 months of Marlene's lawyers arguing that I was a greedy stepdaughter trying to steal from a grieving widow. We proved that Dad had been on heart medication that could cause confusion. We proved that the name change in the legal documents was deliberate and deceptive. We proved that I had been his legal daughter, his emergency contact, his chosen heir for decades. But we couldn't prove that he didn't want to change his mind in those final days. We couldn't prove that Marlene had manipulated him or coerced him. The law is funny that way. It protects people's right to make terrible decisions, even when those decisions destroy the people they love most. In the end, we settled. I got a third of the estate, not because I deserved it, but because Marlene's lawyers were worried about what a jury might think. Worried that the optics of a stepmother erasing her husband's daughter, while that daughter was in surgery, might not play well in court. A third. Of my own father's legacy, like I was some distant relative being thrown a bone. I used part of the money to buy a small house in Sedona, far enough from Phoenix that I don't accidentally drive by places that remind me of Dad, far enough that I don't run into Marlene at the grocery store or the bank. I kept one thing from Dad's house, a photo of the two of us at a job site when I was 12. I'm wearing a hard hat that's too big for my head, and he's pointing at something in the distance. We're both smiling, both happy, both sure that we'll always have each other. I look at that photo sometimes and try to remember what it felt like to be someone's daughter. To be loved unconditionally, to believe that the people who matter most will always be there when you wake up. But mostly, I try not to think about it at all, because the truth is, I didn't just lose my father when he died. I lost him months before that. When Marlene decided I was expendable, when she started planning my erasure, when she began the careful, methodical process of convincing him that his daughter was someone he could live without. The worst part isn't the money, it's not even missing his funeral, though that haunts me every day. The worst part is the corrosive uncertainty. Knowing he spent his final days in the company of a woman who saw me as a threat, who twisted his love into a weapon against me. I'll spend the rest of my life wondering if he knew. Was he confused, scared, or did he die believing the daughter he raised had simply vanished? The settlement didn't bring peace, just a quiet house in Sedona. I thought the distance would help, but you can't outrun a memory. Sometimes I'll see a father and daughter sharing a joke, and it feels like a physical blow. There's no point confronting Marlene. You can't reason with a lie that has already won. She would just deny it, play the victim, and I'd be left feeling even more powerless. She has the money, the company, the house. She can have them. What she can't have is the girl in the oversized hard hat, smiling at her father on a dusty job site. She erased Sienna Chen from a will, but she can't erase that name from my bones. In the end, that's the one part of his legacy she can never touch. Maybe one day I'll let go of the anger, not for her, but for myself, because the weight of it is exhausting, but forgiveness feels like a luxury I haven't earned yet. Until then, I remain what I have always been, his daughter, and that is enough.